Flight simulators are software developed to simulate real-world flying, may it be an airplane, a glider, a helicopter, heck, even a bike. Nowadays, it's common to see additional aircrafts created by the community and brought into the sim. Some are highly detailed in payware, whereas others are just made for fun and don't cost anything. But many people forget that these add-ons wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for default aircrafts. Default aircrafts are aircrafts which are implemented in the simulator by default. You may have to pay a little extra to get more default aircrafts. Either way, you'll still get something to play around with. Most people envision flight simulators default aircrafts such as the Cessna 172, the Airbus A320, or the Cessna Citation. But this didn't used to be the case. Today we'll adventure through every flight simulator, sort of, and take a look at the default aircrafts. Before we start, I have to warn you that I'll only talk about computer flight simulations. Sorry, Explain Mobile. And that I won't cover Explain versions 1 through 10 because there aren't many resources available out there when it comes to Laminar Research, unlike for Microsoft. In 1979, Sublogic released FS1 Flight Simulator for the Apple II, and later in 1980 for the TRS-80. The simulator was obviously a bit too early for its time as technology wasn't advanced enough for simulating open flight. The simulator came with one airplane, the Sopwith Camel, a British fighter plane that served for 3 years, one of which was during World War I. In November 1982, in partnership with Sublogic, Microsoft developed Microsoft Flight Simulator 1.0 for the IBM personal computer. Although better looking than FS1, it was still ahead of its time. Just like FS1, you're forced to one aircraft, this time being the Cessna 182. Again though, the 172 or 182 would have made almost no difference at this day and age of technology. I know this is getting confusing, but bear with me. Flight Simulator 2 is the sequel of FS1 Flight Simulator developed by Sublogic for the Apple II once again. After their cooperation with Microsoft, Sublogic ported their improvements to their own flight simulator and decided to create a new one. Unlike the questionable aircraft choice that was in their last simulator, this time they went with the Piper 28 Cherokee Archer II. I'd love to tell you that Microsoft implemented a new aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2.0, but it turns out they didn't add a new one. In 1988, Microsoft released Microsoft Flight Simulator 3.0 for the MS-DOS. This time, the sim included the Learjet 25, the everlasting Cessna 182, and our good old Sopwith Camel. And finally, players were able to view their plane from an outside view, which gave a bit more immersion into the simulator. Microsoft Flight Simulator 4.0, released in 1989 by Microsoft, is where it gets interesting. In version 4.0, the Sopwith Camel is replaced with the SGS 232 sailplane, leaving the 182 in the Learjet to be. I was a bit skeptical of this, so I decided to buy a fully legal license and download a fully legal version of the game to try it out for real. And as it turns out, there may be a problem here. I won't give too many conclusions here, but for now I'll stick to the manual. Released in 1993, Microsoft Flight Simulator 5.0's default aircrafts are almost identical to the last version if it wasn't for the Cessna 182 RG variant. In 1996, Microsoft released Microsoft Flight Simulator for Windows 95, which finally gave the aircraft textures some revamp. Just like the older version, it includes the Cessna 182 RG, the SGS 232 sailplane, the Learjet 35, the Boeing 737-400, and the Extra 300S. In 1997, it was Windows 98's turn to get its flight simulator. The sim had its first helicopter, being the Bell 206B. The Cessna 182S got introduced, and the Learjet 45 replaced the 35 variant. The simulator kept its old friends like the sailplane, the Cessna 182 RG, the Extra 300, and the Boeing 737. In 7 versions of the series, the Boeing 737-400 is the only airliner. Well, this all changes with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2000, released in 1999. It included all the old aircraft, the Boeing 777-300 and the Concorde, which was still in service at the time. This is where airliners start taking a big part of Flight Simulator's fleet. A month after 9/11, Microsoft released Microsoft Flight Simulator 2002, which included the previous aircrafts, the Cessna 172 Skyhawk, the Cessna Caravan, and the Boeing 747-400. This is the first version to include virtual cockpits, which made the immersion even better. 100 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, Microsoft released Microsoft Flight Simulator 2004, A Century of Flight. The simulator has 24 aircrafts, including 9 vintage aircrafts. These aircrafts include the 1903 Wright Flyer, the DC-3, the J-3 Cub, and many more. And here are all the aircrafts available to the player at first launch. What started out as a simple first-person only Sopwith Camel flying simulator gradually evolved throughout many decades with different editors and developers. But we're not done yet. If you know flight simulation, you know FSX. At the time, it was thought to be the culmination of every other flight sim, a peak in the world of flight simulation. Of course, this flight simulator became outdated as soon as Lockheed Martin developed Prepared after having bought FSX code from Microsoft. The standard edition of FSX included 18 aircrafts. Because the sim wasn't focused on history, there weren't as much historical aircrafts as in FS 2004. But FSX is where it gets interesting once again, because FSX has 3 different versions in total. Standard, which we just covered, Deluxe, which has more aircrafts, an SDK, and the ability to act as ATC in multiplayer. A year after FSX release, Microsoft released FSX Acceleration, an expansion pack for both FSX Standard and Deluxe. For those who are just coming aboard, Microsoft released FSX Gold, which combines FSX Deluxe and the expansion pack. So if you had the Gold edition, this is what you had to start with. Not bad for something that released when computers just began counting RAM in gigabytes. And fortunately for the flight simulation world, this is where everything begins to slow down. In 2006, FSX was published by Microsoft, but not many people know it was developed by Aces Game Studio. Right after having finished FSX Acceleration, Aces announced Microsoft Enterprise Simulation Platform, or ESP for short. ESP is a bit like how Mario Maker was just supposed to be a tool for Nintendo developers, but turned out to be a full-fledged title. The only difference is that Lockheed bought ESP from Microsoft in 2009 because Aces had closed down following Microsoft's decision to cut down on jobs. All this to say that Lockheed Martin now had full possession of FSX source code. And in November 2010, Prepared 1.0 was released. P3D only had a small portion of FSX aircrafts. However, Lockheed eventually added military aircrafts to better reflect the company's needs. Because although P3D does have an academic license, its purpose is to train actual flight crew or try out aircraft models. Disclaimer, all these aircrafts are the ones included in version 5, not version 1. The most notable aircrafts are the AC-11 Commander, the C-130, which is very close to the C-17, which I may have made a video on, a lot of F-16s and F-35s, and according to Prepared's website, a civilian utility aircraft single engine, which is probably just a Cessna 172. In mid-2014, Laminar Research released X-Plane 10, 19 years after the original version came out. The default aircrafts collection was well varied, with a few airliners, some civilian aircrafts, and of course some military aircrafts. And the orbiter from the space shuttle for some reason. According to Steam, X-Plane 10 didn't do so well, and so in Q1 2017 came X-Plane 11. Version 11 actually has less aircrafts included than version 10, coming in with 18 aircrafts. To be fair, some of these have had a major overhaul compared to the last version. With the new 737 came the incredible Zibo mod, a free add-on which enhances the default 737-800. It became so popular that the term Zibo means a good freeware add-on that expands user experience from the base package. Once again, here's the full list. Most of these planes even included default liveries, a rare luxury that even other simulators struggle to integrate. 8 months following X-Plane's newest installment, IPAX, not to be confused with the International Partnership Against Corruption in Sports, released Aerofly FS2. AFS2 is the underdog of today's simulators. In a way, AFS2 is somewhat similar to X-Plane 11, with 22 default aircrafts ranging from civilian, airliners, helicopters, you name it. And just like X-Plane 11, it has default liveries included. And finally, as of today, the latest major flight simulator is Microsoft Flight Simulator. There are way too many things to talk about this simulator. The visuals are stunning, the flight models aren't too bad depending on which aircraft you're flying. Following FSX legacy, Microsoft Flight Simulator has 3 different packages. Standard with 20 aircraft, Deluxe with 25, and Premium with 30. Microsoft Flight Simulator's aircraft fleet relies a lot on civilian aircrafts and airliners, which, as a result, makes the whole collection less varied. The default A320neo gave birth to the A32NX mod, which, coincidentally, used to be called the Zibo A320. And that's it for all the big flight simulators. I'm obviously aware that I missed some smaller flight simulators like Every Explained version or the Microsoft Combat Flight Simulator series. My goal was to represent as clearly as possible the starting aircrafts on all big flight simulators of each period of time. Flight simulators may just be software that can make something fly with accuracy, but if no one at Sublogic had the idea to implement a random British fighter plane, then maybe default aircrafts wouldn't have been a thing. Or maybe they would have just put a Cessna. Who knows? Thank you for watching this video. This was my first big project on this channel, and I hope you liked it. If you want to support my content, please like and share this video. It's the most efficient way you can help my channel get better referencing from the YouTube algorithm. In the meantime, this was Adrian Kerbel. See you next time.